Rain streaked down the glass walls of a private hospital in Washington, D.C., turning the city lights into blurred veins of gold and red. Inside the restricted surgical wing, alarms echoed softly. Not urgent yet, but close enough to taste fear. The kind of fear money could not silence. General Daniel Rourke lay on a narrow hospital bed, his jaw clenched, his body rigid despite the painkillers flowing through his veins. At 56, he had survived ambushes, explosions, and decisions that had sent other men to their graves. But tonight, a fragment of metal no bigger than a fingernail was migrating inside his spine. One wrong shift, and he would never walk again. One more, and he would stop breathing altogether. Doctors had lined up outside his room like polished suits at a fundraiser. Neurosurgeons with Ivy League resumes, specialists whose names were etched into medical journals. Rourke rejected them all. "No politicians, no showboats," he said through gritted teeth. "I want the one they call when nobody else can fix it." The hospital administrator swallowed hard before answering. There was only one name left: Dr. Claire Whitman. Claire stood alone at the scrub sink, washing her hands with mechanical precision. 41 years old, chief trauma surgeon, known for steady hands and a colder-than-steel refusal to be impressed by rank or reputation. She had just finished a 14-hour shift, her shoulders aching beneath her white coat, her coffee untouched and cold on the counter. When the call came, she almost said no. VIP cases always came with politics attached, pressure, silence agreements, lies disguised as protocol. She had spent 15 years building a life where none of that could reach her. But then she heard the patient's name, Daniel Rourke. The room seemed to tilt. For a fraction of a second, the antiseptic smell vanished, replaced by heat, dust, and the sound of helicopters she had learned to hear in her sleep. Claire steadied herself against the counter. Her reflection in the stainless steel looked calm, detached, professional. The woman inside her was anything but. They told her the general had refused sedation until he met the surgeon, that he was demanding, difficult, and very aware that time was running out. Claire listened without comment, dried her hands, and pulled on fresh gloves. She walked down the corridor with measured steps, past doors that led to operating rooms, recovery bays, and places where people waited to find out if they would wake up the same as they were before. When she stopped outside pre-op room 4, her hand hovered over the handle. Inside was the man who believed she had died 15 years ago. Inside was the man she believed had left her behind. Claire opened the door. Daniel Rourke turned his head slowly. Their eyes met. The general's face drained of color, his breath catching as if the injury in his spine had suddenly reached his heart. For the first time since he had been wheeled into the hospital, fear showed plainly on his face, because the woman standing before him, calm, alive, holding his future in her hands, was supposed to be dead. 15 years earlier, Claire Whitman had not yet learned how to turn fear into silence. She was 26, fresh out of medical training, deployed as a combat medic to a forward operating base carved into dust and rock. The desert had no mercy there. Heat pressed against skin like a second body, and nights arrived without warning, swallowing everything in darkness except the red blink of distant equipment and the low thrum of helicopters circling overhead. That was where she met Captain Daniel Rourke. He wasn't loud. He wasn't cruel. He didn't pretend war was glorious. He stood apart from the others, studying maps under dim light, shoulders heavy with responsibility. To Claire, he looked older than his years, a man who carried decisions no one would ever thank him for. He treated her with quiet respect, asked for her medical opinion, waited when she spoke. In a place where most men barked orders, Daniel listened. Their connection grew in fragments, shared coffee from dented metal cups, conversations cut short by incoming fire, moments stolen between casualties. He talked about duty. She talked about saving lives. Neither of them planned to fall in love. It happened anyway, slowly, dangerously, in a place where tomorrow was never promised. The night everything broke apart came without warning. A routine extraction turned into chaos. Gunfire ripped through the air. Explosions shook the ground. Claire was treating a wounded soldier when the blast threw her backward, pain slicing through her leg like white fire. She remembered screaming orders, dragging bodies, blood soaking into the sand. She remembered Daniel shouting into a radio, his voice sharp with urgency. Then the helicopter lifted. She watched it rise into the night sky, rotors cutting through smoke, carrying the men who could still move, carrying Daniel. The sound faded. Silence rushed in. Claire waited. Minutes stretched into hours. Her leg was broken, her supplies nearly gone. She crawled, hid, survived on instinct and stubborn refusal to die. No rescue came. By morning, enemy patrols moved through the area, and Claire disappeared into the landscape with the help of local villagers who knew how to vanish when the world decided you didn't matter anymore. Back home, paperwork moved faster than people. Her name was stamped KIA. Her file was sealed. Her parents received a folded flag and a letter signed by men who never met her. Daniel Rourke was told the same thing everyone else was told. No survivors, no bodies recovered. Case closed. Claire learned the truth months later, when she reached an embassy under a false name and realized her death had already been filed, approved, and archived. Someone had decided she was easier to bury than explain. So she stayed buried. She changed her name. She rebuilt her career. She learned to live without asking why she had been left behind because the answer hurt too much to carry. And now, 15 years later, the man who haunted her silence lay on a hospital bed, staring at her like he was looking at a ghost. Neither of them knew yet that what destroyed their past wasn't abandonment. It was design. The operating room was colder than it needed to be, not because of temperature, but because silence had weight. Blue surgical lights flooded the table where General Daniel Rourke lay face down, his body immobilized, his neck exposed like a final confession. Machines hummed steadily, measuring breath, heartbeat, time. Dr. Claire Whitman stood over him, gloved hands raised, eyes fixed on the narrow strip of skin that separated life from paralysis. She had trained for moments like this, trauma scenes, multi-car pileups, gunshot wounds that demanded instant decisions and absolute focus. But nothing in her career had prepared her to hold a scalpel above the spine of the man who once defined her past. "Begin," she said quietly. The first incision was clean, precise. Muscle parted under practiced hands. Claire worked on instinct, letting muscle memory take control while her mind tried not to wander. Every millimeter mattered. The fragment was unstable, lodged dangerously close to the spinal cord. One wrong move, and Daniel Rourke would never move again. As she worked deeper, memories pushed against the edges of her focus. The sound of rotor blades, the smell of burning fuel, the moment she realized the helicopter wasn't coming back. Her hands did not shake. "Retractor," she said. A nurse placed the instrument without a word. The room trusted her. They always did. Claire was known for calm under pressure, for doing what others hesitated to attempt. But beneath the surgical mask, her jaw tightened. This wasn't just a patient. This was the man she had waited for until hope turned into survival. The man she had cursed in silence for 15 years. And now, his future rested in her hands. The fragment came into view under magnification. Claire paused. It wasn't shaped like shrapnel. Her brow furrowed as she adjusted the microscope. Most battlefield fragments were jagged, uneven, corroded. This piece was smooth in places. Too smooth, metallic, reflective under the surgical light. It looked engineered. Her pulse quickened. "Hold suction," she said. "Don't move." She leaned closer, studying the edges. There was discoloration along one side, a warped sheen that suggested exposure to extreme heat. Not the kind caused by an explosion alone, not the kind she had seen before. Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with the operating room. "Focus," she told herself. She maneuvered carefully, easing the fragment free. For a split second, resistance pushed back. Then it released, slipping into her forceps with a faint metallic click that echoed too loudly in her ears. The monitors remained steady. No alarms, no sudden drops. The room exhaled. "Fragment out," Claire said. She placed it into a sterile tray, her eyes lingering on it longer than protocol required. Something about it unsettled her. Something didn't fit the story she had been told for 15 years. She closed the incision with the same care she had opened it, layer by layer, stitch by stitch. When the final suture was placed, Claire stepped back, removing her gloves slowly. Daniel Rourke would live. He would walk. But as Claire stared at the small piece of metal resting under the light, she understood something had just changed. This surgery hadn't only saved a life, it had reopened a past that refused to stay buried. Claire Whitman didn't sleep after the surgery. The hospital was quiet in the hours before dawn, the kind of silence that only existed in private wings where powerful people healed behind locked doors. Claire sat alone in her office, the city of Washington, D.C. glowing faintly beyond the window, untouched coffee cooling beside her unopened laptop. Between her hands rested a sealed evidence container. Inside it lay the fragment she had removed from Daniel Rourke's spine. She turned it slowly under the desk lamp. Up close, the unease she had felt in the operating room sharpened into certainty. The metal was too refined, its surface unnaturally smooth along one edge, warped, as if exposed to sustained, focused heat, rather than the chaotic force of an explosion. Claire knew battlefield injuries. She had treated hundreds. Shrapnel tore, splintered, oxidized. This piece had been altered, deliberately. She pulled medical reference files from memory, replaying years of trauma cases in her mind. Nothing matched. Her chest tightened as a single thought surfaced, unwelcome and dangerous. This didn't come from the enemy. Hours later, Daniel Rourke woke in the recovery unit, groggy but alive. The pain that had haunted him for months was gone, replaced by soreness and a heavy fog. When Claire entered, he struggled to sit up, stopping when she raised a hand. "Don't," she said. "You won't win that argument." He managed a weak smile. "You always were bossy." The familiarity hit them both at once. It lingered, fragile, before Claire pushed it aside. "The surgery was successful," she said evenly. "You'll recover." Relief crossed his face, followed quickly by something darker. "And the fragment?" Claire hesitated, then handed him a tablet displaying magnified images of the metal. Daniel studied it, his brow slowly furrowing. "That's not right," he murmured. "No," Claire agreed. "It isn't." She explained what she had seen, what didn't align with any standard injury pattern. As she spoke, Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to recognition. His fingers tightened against the sheets. "My helicopter didn't explode the way they said," he said quietly. Claire felt the words settle between them, heavy and irreversible. Daniel swallowed. "After the crash, I was told you were gone. No survivors, no chance of recovery." "And I was told nothing," Claire replied, "because I was already declared dead." Their eyes met, years of silence pressing down on the moment. Anger flared, but beneath it was something more unsettling. If neither of them had been lying, then someone else had. Daniel exhaled slowly. There was pressure. Orders that night that didn't make sense, reports rewritten before I ever saw them. Claire looked at the fragment again. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't random. A knock sounded at the door, sharp and unwelcome. Claire turned just as a hospital administrator stepped in, flanked by two men in dark suits who did not wear hospital badges. "Dr. Whitman," the administrator said carefully, "the Department of Defense has requested General Rourke's immediate transfer." Daniel's jaw set. Claire felt it then. The shift in air, the instinct she had learned in war zones. They weren't here to help. They were here to clean something up. And for the first time since she'd been erased from the world, Claire understood that surviving the past might be more dangerous than dying in it. The men didn't introduce themselves. They didn't need to. Their suits were dark, tailored, expensive in a way that didn't belong in a hospital. Their posture was too controlled, their eyes too alert, scanning exits instead of medical equipment. Claire recognized the type instantly. She'd seen them before, standing behind officials, hovering at the edge of disaster scenes, always arriving after decisions had already been made. One of them smiled, thin and practiced. "Dr. Whitman, we appreciate your excellent work. The Department of Defense has arranged for General Rourke's transfer to a military medical facility, effective immediately." Daniel shifted in his bed, pain flashing briefly across his face before discipline took over. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I just came out of surgery." The man's smile didn't move his eyes. "This isn't a request, General." Claire felt something tighten in her chest. "He's not medically stable for transport," she said. "Any movement could compromise his recovery." "We've reviewed the file," the second man replied, his voice smooth, detached. "We'll assume responsibility from here." Claire's gaze flicked to the administrator standing behind them, pale and sweating. He avoided her eyes. That told her everything. "This patient is under my care," Claire said, keeping her voice level. "You don't override medical authority without cause." The first man stepped closer. "Doctor, your cooperation would be appreciated." It was subtle, almost polite. It was also a threat. Daniel watched Claire carefully now, seeing something shift behind her calm expression. He had faced enemy interrogators before. He knew the look of pressure disguised as procedure. "What happens to the surgical debris?" Daniel asked suddenly. The man turned to him. "All materials will be collected and properly disposed of." Claire's hand curled slightly at her side. Disposed of. Not examined, not documented, erased. "No," she said. The room went very still. The man blinked, surprised. "Excuse me?" "That fragment is part of an active medical record," Claire said. "It's evidence of a non-standard injury. It stays." The second man's jaw tightened. "Doctor, you're stepping into matters beyond your clearance." Claire met his stare. "Then someone shouldn't have put classified metal inside a patient's spine." Silence fell hard. Daniel felt it then, the truth clicking into place. This wasn't about his health. This was about control, about making sure nothing unexpected survived long enough to be questioned. The first man exhaled slowly. "Dr. Whitman, you were declared deceased once already. I'd hate for administrative confusion to resurface." Claire didn't flinch. She thought of the desert, of crawling while the world decided she was already gone, of rebuilding a life no one bothered to look for. "I didn't survive 15 years to disappear quietly," she said. Daniel reached out, gripping the edge of the bed. "You touch her, this stops being quiet," he warned. The men exchanged a glance. This wasn't going as planned. Finally, the first man nodded. "We'll return shortly." They turned and left, the door closing with a soft, final click. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Daniel looked at her, voice low. "They're not done." "No," Claire said. "They're just getting started." And for the first time, she understood the truth with absolute clarity. Saving Daniel's life had put a target on both of them, and this time, there would be no official record if they failed. Claire moved fast once the door closed. She didn't panic. Panic wasted time. She had learned that lesson bleeding in sand, counting breaths while waiting for people who never came. Instead, she listened to the rhythm of the hospital, to the distant footsteps in the corridor, to the subtle hum of systems designed to keep people alive and monitored. "They'll be back," Daniel said quietly from the bed. "I know," Claire replied, "which means we don't wait." She checked his vitals with quick, efficient movements. Blood pressure stable, heart rate elevated but manageable, pain controlled. He wasn't ready to walk far, but he could move if he had to. That would have to be enough. Claire pulled a folded set of scrubs from a locker and tossed them onto the bed. "Change," she said, slowly. "Don't argue." Daniel gave a short, humorless breath that might have been a laugh. "You always did hate arguments." She ignored that. Her mind was already mapping routes, service corridors, supply elevators, blind spots between cameras. This hospital catered to powerful people, which meant it had hidden ways in and out that never appeared on public floor plans. Claire slipped into the hallway, scanning both directions before signaling him forward. She supported his weight without comment as they moved, her arms steady at his back. Every step sent pain flaring through his body, but Daniel bit it down, refusing to be the weak point. They reached a service elevator just as voices echoed from the main corridor. "Stop," Claire whispered. They pressed into a recessed alcove as two security officers passed, talking quietly, unaware. Claire waited 3 seconds after their footsteps faded before moving again. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded far too loud. Inside, the air smelled like cleaning chemicals and metal. Claire hit the button for the lower levels, her pulse ticking faster with every passing second. When the doors closed, Daniel leaned back against the wall, sweat breaking across his forehead. "You shouldn't be doing this," he murmured. Claire met his eyes. Neither should they. The elevator slowed, stopped. The doors opened onto a dim service level lined with carts, laundry bins, and the quiet machinery that kept the building invisible and running. Claire guided Daniel forward, her senses sharp, every sound magnified. A single security camera blinked above the exit. She pulled a badge from her pocket, borrowed, untraceable, and swiped it. The light turned green. They moved into the night through a side exit that led into a narrow alley behind the hospital. Rain misted the air, the city humming unaware around them. Claire helped Daniel into the passenger seat of an old sedan parked under a flickering streetlight. "Seatbelt," she said. He obeyed. As she drove away, headlights cutting through the darkness, Daniel stared at the city sliding past, realization settling in. They were gone. No paperwork, no authorization, no safety net. Claire kept her eyes on the road. "Once we disappear," she said, "there's no going back." Daniel nodded slowly. "Good." Behind them, the hospital stood calm and silent, already rewriting its records. And somewhere inside, powerful men were realizing their problem hadn't been solved. It had escaped. They hid where no one would think to look. The cabin sat deep in the Virginia woods, miles from the nearest town, its single porch light flickering weakly against the trees. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. For the first time since leaving the hospital, the world was quiet enough to hear their own breathing. Daniel sat heavily at the small wooden table, his movements careful, deliberate. Claire knelt beside him, checking the surgical dressing beneath the dim glow of a battery lamp. The wound was holding, but his body was exhausted. So was hers. "You're safe for now," she said. "For now?" Daniel echoed. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything that hadn't been said. The rain tapped softly against the windows like distant applause for a performance neither of them wanted to give. Finally, Daniel spoke. "They didn't leave you," he said. "Not the way you think." Claire's hands paused. "Then explain it," she said quietly. "Explain why I watched the helicopter leave." Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them, the general was gone. What remained was a man stripped of rank and armor. "The order came through seconds before liftoff," he said. "Abort retrieval, immediate extraction, classified override." "From who?" Claire asked, though she already knew the answer. "Secretary Harold Whitaker," Daniel said. "Back then, he was running black operations no one asked questions about." The name landed like a weight in Claire's chest. Daniel continued, voice steady but raw. "Our unit wasn't there for the mission we were told. We stumbled onto something else. Weapons transfers, resource deals, money moving through places it shouldn't exist. You weren't collateral, Claire. You were a witness." Claire swallowed hard. "They needed us gone," Daniel said. All of us. The crash wasn't an accident. It was a cleanup. The room felt smaller with every word. They told me you were dead, he went on. Showed me falsified drone footage, signed reports. I fought it, but I was shut down, promoted, watched, controlled. Claire stood slowly, anger rising in her chest like heat after years of cold. So while I learned how to survive without a name, they built careers on burying the truth. Yes, Daniel said. And when I started asking questions again, the fragment moved. Claire looked at him sharply. They didn't expect you to survive long enough to leave that hospital, he added. Understanding settled in like a bruise. This isn't over, Claire said. Daniel shook his head. It's just beginning. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small satellite phone, placing it on the table between them. There are others, he said. Men who disappeared, men who know pieces of this story. They'll listen to me, but they'll believe you. Claire stared at the phone, then at him. For 15 years, she said, I lived like the past couldn't touch me. Daniel met her gaze. And now? She picked up the phone, her grip steady. Now, Claire said, we make sure it never gets buried again. Outside, the woods remained silent, but the war they thought had ended was finally awake. The calls went out before sunrise. Claire sat at the small kitchen table, the satellite phone resting in front of her like a loaded weapon. Daniel watched from the doorway, leaning carefully against the frame, his face pale but focused. Every movement still cost him, but his eyes were sharp, awake, ready. The first number rang twice before a voice answered. Stop calling this line, the man growled. Daniel Rourke is either dead or insane. Claire leaned forward. This is Dr. Claire Whitman, she said calmly. Forward operating base 15 years ago. I was declared KIA. Silence followed, long, heavy. That's not possible, the voice finally said, quieter now. I crawled out, Claire replied, and someone made sure no one came back for us. The line went dead. Daniel exhaled slowly. He'll call back. He did. Then another phone rang, and another. By mid-morning, the cabin no longer felt empty. It felt crowded with ghosts who were suddenly breathing again, men who had vanished from records, men who had been reassigned, silenced, or buried under paperwork and threats. Each call peeled back another layer of the same story. Orders rerouted, reports altered, careers advanced on lies. Claire listened, absorbing details, dates, names. She wrote everything down in neat, precise handwriting. This wasn't emotion. This was evidence. These men trusted the system, Daniel said quietly. It destroyed them. And it underestimated us, Claire replied. By afternoon, the plan began to form. They couldn't hide forever. Running only delayed the inevitable. If they stayed in the shadows, they would be hunted one by one until someone made a mistake that couldn't be explained away. Exposure was the only protection left. Claire contacted Senator Olivia Grant through a secure channel she had memorized years ago and never expected to use. Grant had built her career questioning defense spending and vanished operations. She didn't dismiss Claire's message. She asked for proof. Claire sent her everything: medical images, metallurgical analysis, statements from men who had been told to forget what they saw, and a recorded message from Daniel, spoken slowly, clearly, without accusation or panic. This is not revenge, he said into the camera. This is correction. That evening, Claire stepped outside the cabin, breathing in the cool air. The sun dipped low behind the trees, painting the sky in deep orange and gray. For years, she had survived by staying invisible, by refusing to exist where power could find her. Inside, Daniel struggled to his feet, joining her at the doorway. You don't have to do this, he said. You could disappear again. Claire shook her head. Not this time. She thought of the woman she used to be, the one who waited for rescue that never came, the one who accepted erasure because fighting felt impossible. I survived for a reason, she said, and I'm done being quiet. Daniel nodded, understanding settling between them. Once this goes public, there's no control over what follows. Claire met his gaze. Truth doesn't need control. In the distance, the wind moved through the trees, steady and relentless. The trap was set, and the people who believed they had buried the past were about to learn something they had forgotten. Some stories don't stay dead. The hearing room was designed to intimidate. Polished wood panels rose toward a ceiling etched with seals and flags, every surface meant to remind visitors where power lived. Cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking patiently. Senators murmured among themselves, staffers shuffled papers, and security stood alert at every exit. At the center of it all sat Secretary Harold Whitaker, composed, immaculate, his hands folded as if this were just another routine appearance. He wore the calm of a man who had testified 100 times and walked away untouched. That calm cracked the moment the doors opened. General Daniel Rourke entered slowly, leaning on a cane, his steps measured but unbroken. The room shifted. Whispers rippled through the audience. Reporters leaned forward. Some recognized him instantly. Others stared, confused, because the man they were told had lost his mind was standing very much alive. Daniel took a seat at the witness table without speaking. Then Claire Whitman walked in behind him. She didn't wear a uniform. She didn't wear a white coat. Just a simple dark suit, her hair pulled back, her expression steady. She carried a thin folder in one hand and something heavier in the other, a sealed evidence bag. Senator Olivia Grant raised her gavel. This hearing will come to order. Whitaker adjusted his glasses, his practiced expression returning. Before we begin, he said smoothly, I must object to the presence of unauthorized individuals. Grant's gaze didn't waver. You don't get to decide who exists anymore, Secretary. The room went still. Claire stepped forward. My name is Dr. Claire Whitman, she said, her voice clear, amplified across the chamber. 15 years ago, I was declared killed in action during a classified operation. That declaration was false. Cameras erupted. Whitaker's jaw tightened, just slightly. Claire placed the evidence bag on the table. Yesterday, I removed this from General Rourke's spine. Grant leaned in. Doctor, can you explain its significance? Yes, Claire said. This fragment is composed of military-grade alloy, consistent with internal aircraft components. Its thermal damage indicates controlled detonation, not external attack. Murmurs spread through the room. Daniel spoke next, his voice steady despite the pain. Our helicopter didn't go down by accident. The retrieval order that night came directly from Secretary Whitaker. Whitaker stood abruptly. This is absurd, he snapped. These are traumatized individuals inventing a narrative. Grant raised a hand. Sit down. Whitaker froze. Grant continued. We have corroborating testimony, flight logs, witness statements, and classified documents that were never meant to surface. She turned to Claire. Doctor? Claire met Whitaker's eyes. You didn't just erase me, she said quietly. You erased truth. And you underestimated how long it waits. Whitaker's composure finally broke. His face drained as security stepped closer, not toward Claire or Daniel, but toward him. Grant's gavel struck the desk. Secretary Harold Whitaker, you are relieved of duty pending investigation. The room exploded into chaos. Cameras flashed, voices rose. But through it all, Claire and Daniel sat silently. The truth had finally spoken, and it could not be undone. 3 months later, Washington felt different. Not quieter, not cleaner, just more honest. The headlines had moved on as they always did, chasing newer scandals and louder outrage, but the consequences remained. Investigations spread outward like cracks in ice. Committees formed, careers ended. Some men resigned quietly. Others were escorted out through side doors they never thought they would use. Secretary Harold Whitaker was no longer addressed by his title. For Claire Whitman, the end did not arrive with applause. It came softly, on an ordinary morning, as she stood in her small apartment watching sunlight stretch across the floor. No alarms, no calls, no men in dark suits waiting outside, just space. She had taken a leave of absence from the hospital, not because she was broken, but because she was tired of surviving on adrenaline. For years, saving lives had been her way of outrunning a past that refused to stay buried. Now the past had been faced, named, and exposed. There was nothing left to run from. Daniel Rourke recovered slowly. The cane disappeared first. The stiffness lingered longer. He turned down offers to advise, to consult, to stand in front of cameras as a symbol of resilience. He had worn symbols long enough. They met one afternoon by the river, where the city softened and the noise faded. Daniel moved carefully, but without fear now. Claire noticed the change immediately. "You're not guarding every step," she said. He smiled faintly. "I don't feel like I'm about to be pushed anymore." They sat in silence, watching the water move forward without hesitation. It reminded Claire of something she had forgotten, that life did not need permission to continue. "I spent years thinking my survival was a mistake," she admitted, "like I was living on borrowed time." Daniel shook his head. "You were living on stolen truth. There's a difference." Claire let that settle. The world hadn't magically fixed itself. Justice was slow, incomplete. But something essential had shifted. The lie that erased her had been undone. Her name existed again, not as a headline, as a person. Later that evening, Claire packed a small bag. Nothing dramatic, just clothes, books, and a quiet intention to rest somewhere that didn't ask her to be strong all the time. Daniel watched from the doorway. "You don't have to disappear," he said. "I'm not," Claire replied. "I'm choosing where I exist." He nodded, understanding at last. They hugged once. No promises, no declarations. Just two people who had survived something meant to erase them. As Claire closed the door behind her, she felt something unfamiliar but welcome. Peace. Not because everything was over, but because, for the first time, nothing was unfinished. So, the story has come to an end. And if you're still here with us right now, truly still here at this moment, then something in this journey must have touched your heart in a quiet but meaningful way. Because this was never just a story about power, betrayal, or justice. It was about what happens when truth is buried and how it still finds a way to breathe. It reminds us that sometimes the deepest wounds are not physical, but the years we spend believing we were abandoned, erased, or forgotten. As the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Pain does not always break us. Often it reshapes us. Claire's healing didn't come from revenge. It came from choosing courage over silence, clarity over fear. And Daniel's redemption wasn't in power, but in finally facing the truth he'd been running from. That's a lesson for all of us. We may not control what happened to us, but as Epictetus taught, we control how we respond. And that response can change everything. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something you've been carrying quietly, please like the video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us tell more stories that heal, not just entertain. And remember, you're not alone in your journey.